The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Sloan, Montana Territory, when Hayden O'Malley rode in, his broad shoulders slumped with more than just the weariness of the trail. Blood seeped through his shirt, darkening the fabric beneath his duster, yet his lips were curled into an easy smile that never quite reached his eyes as he nodded to the townsfolk he passed. Pain was an old companion he'd learned to hide well, much like the 6-inch gash along his ribs that no one but he needed to know about. It was 1876, a hard year across the Western Territories. The gold rush had faded, leaving behind desperate men and half-empty towns scrambling to find purpose. Sloan was different, though neither boom town nor ghost town, but somewhere caught in between, with enough commerce to sustain itself and enough lawlessness to keep life interesting. Hayden guided his chestnut mare toward the hitching post outside the town's only saloon, the effort making him clench his jaw against the fire shooting through his side. 3 days of riding with an untended wound had left him feverish and weak, but he'd be damned if he'd let anyone see it. He dismounted with practiced ease that belied his injury, patting the horse's neck with affection. "Rest up, Bonnie," he murmured, securing her reins. "We'll be here a while." The Rusty Nail Saloon hummed with afternoon activity card games in progress, a piano player tinkling out a half-hearted tune, working girls circulating with drinks and promises. Hayden made his way to the bar, each step carefully measured to hide the limp he'd developed. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, placing a coin on the worn wooden surface. The barkeep nodded, pouring a generous measure. "New in town?" the man asked, eyeing Hayden's trail-worn appearance. "Just passing through," Hayden replied with that same disarming smile that revealed nothing. He tossed back the whiskey, welcoming the burn that momentarily distracted from the throbbing in his side. "Looking for work?" the bartender asked, already refilling the glass. Hayden considered the question. His funds were dwindling and he couldn't ride much further in his condition. "Might be." "Depends on the work. Randall over at the liveries looking for help. His boy broke his leg last week." Hayden nodded his thanks for the information, then turned to survey the room, leaning casually against the bar to take weight off his injured side. That's when he saw her for the first time, a woman, unlike any other in the establishment, clearly not one of the saloon girls. She sat alone at a corner table, a leather-bound book open before her, seemingly oblivious to the raucous atmosphere. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical style, though a few wayward strands had escaped to frame a face of striking beauty and intelligence. She wore a simple blue dress, modest compared to the flashy attire of the other women present. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up suddenly, her eyes meeting his across the room. For a moment, Hayden forgot to breathe. Instead of looking away as a proper lady might, she held his gaze steadily, her expression curious rather than offended. A slight furrow appeared between her brows as her eyes narrowed, studying him with unexpected intensity. The connection broke when a burly miner stumbled into Hayden's wounded side. White-hot pain shot through him, and he barely managed to keep his expression neutral as he steadied himself. "Sorry, friend," the miner slurred, clearly deep in his cups despite the early hour. "No harm done," Hayden lied through gritted teeth, though his knuckles were white around his whiskey glass. When he looked back to the corner, the woman was gone. Disappointment washed over him, surprisingly sharp for a reaction to a stranger he'd only glimpsed. He was about to turn back to the bar when the saloon's batwing doors swung open, and 3 rough-looking men entered, their eyes scanning the room with predatory intent. Hayden recognized trouble when he saw it. These weren't local roughnecks looking for entertainment, they were hunters, and they moved with purpose. He casually adjusted his position to keep his gun hand free while maintaining his relaxed posture. The tallest of the three spotted him and nudged his companions. They exchanged words, too low to hear across the now quieting room. Hayden took another sip of whiskey, mentally calculating his odds against three armed men while wounded. Not good. The men started toward him, hands hovering near their holstered weapons. Hayden set down his glass. "Hayden O'Malley," the lead man called out, his voice carrying across the now silent saloon. "Fancy meeting you here." "Can't say I have the pleasure," Hayden replied, though he had a sinking feeling he knew exactly who had sent them. "Mr. Blackwell sends his regards," the man continued, confirming Hayden's suspicion. "Says you took something that belongs to him." "Blackwell's mistaken," Hayden said, his smile never faltering though his eyes had turned cold. "I never took anything that wasn't already stolen." The mention of Blackwell's name had caused a ripple of unease throughout the saloon. Victor Blackwell was a cattle baron from Wyoming Territory with a reputation for ruthlessness that extended well beyond state lines. If he wanted something or someone retrieved, he didn't spare expense or mercy. "We can do this easy or hard," the spokesman continued, taking another step forward. "Your choice." Hayden weighed his options quickly. In his current condition, he couldn't outfight or outrun these men, but surrendering wasn't in his nature, especially not to Blackwell's hired guns. "I've always preferred easy," he said affably. "Unfortunately, so has Blackwell. Tell him if he wants to discuss matters, he can come himself instead of sending his dogs." The insult hit its mark. The spokesman's face darkened with anger, and his hand moved to his gun. Before he could draw, however, the sound of a shotgun being cocked echoed through the room. "Not in my establishment," the bartender said firmly, the double barrels of his shotgun visible over the counter. "Take your business outside or not at all." A tense moment passed as the three men reconsidered their position. Finally, the leader nodded. "This isn't over, O'Malley. We'll be waiting." "I'd expect nothing less," Hayden replied pleasantly. The men backed out of the saloon, maintaining eye contact until they pushed through the doors. Conversation slowly resumed, though Hayden noticed several patrons making discreet exits, not wanting to be caught in potential crossfire. "You've brought trouble to my door," the bartender observed, still holding the shotgun. "Seems trouble follows me," Hayden admitted. "I appreciate the intervention, but it won't stop them." "Wasn't doing it for you," the man replied gruffly. "Dead bodies are bad for business." Hayden nodded, understanding perfectly. He drained his whiskey and pushed away from the bar, fighting to keep his movements smooth despite the pain. He needed to collect Bonnie and find somewhere to lay low until he could figure out his next move. The wound in his side had other ideas, however. As he stepped away from the bar, a wave of dizziness washed over him, and the room tilted alarmingly. He managed 3 more steps before his legs gave out. As he crumpled to the floor, the last thing he saw was a pair of women's boots rushing toward him, and a voice calling out for someone to help her. When Hayden regained consciousness, the first thing he noticed was that he was lying on a soft bed rather than the hard saloon floor. The second was that his shirt was gone, and his side had been cleaned and bandaged. "Finally awake, I see," came a woman's voice from nearby. He turned his head to find the auburn-haired woman from the saloon sitting in a chair beside the bed, a book open in her lap. Up close, her eyes were a startling green, and her features even more refined than he'd first thought. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice raspy. "My clinic," she replied, setting aside her book and moving to pour water from a pitcher. "I'm Dr. Sophia Lawson." Hayden blinked in surprise. "Doctor," she handed him the water with an expression that suggested she was well accustomed to that reaction. Yes, Mr. O'Malley, a doctor. I studied at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. Drink this. He accepted the water gratefully, noting that she'd already learned his name. How long have I been out? About 4 hours, she said, watching him with a clinical eye as he drank. You're lucky. That wound was badly infected. A day or two more without treatment and you'd likely have died. Wouldn't be the first time luck's been on my side, he replied with his customary smile, then winced as he tried to sit up. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Dr. Lawson cautioned, moving to adjust the pillows behind him instead. I've cleaned and stitched the wound, but you've lost a significant amount of blood. You need rest. Rest is a luxury I can't afford at the moment, Doc, Hayden said, though he settled back against the pillows. There are some rather persistent gentlemen waiting for me. Yes, I heard about your saloon encounter, she said dryly. Sheriff Mills has been notified about Blackwell's men, but he suggested you might want to resolve whatever dispute you have with their employer. Hayden gave a short laugh that ended in a grimace. The dispute isn't one that can be easily resolved. Dr. Lawson regarded him thoughtfully. Most disputes rarely are, especially ones that lead to knife wounds. This, Hayden glanced down at his bandaged side. This wasn't Blackwell, different disagreement entirely. You seem to collect disagreements, Mr. O'Malley. Hazard of the profession, he replied lightly. And what profession is that? She asked, arching an eyebrow. Hayden hesitated. I acquire things for people. You're a thief, she translated, her tone matter of fact rather than accusatory. I prefer to think of myself as a specialist in complicated acquisitions, he corrected with a charm that had softened many harsher judgments in the past. To his surprise, Dr. Lawson appeared immune to it. And what did you acquire that has Mr. Blackwell sending men after you? Hayden studied her for a moment, unsure why he was even considering answering truthfully. There was something about her direct gaze that made deception seem pointless. His ledger, he finally admitted. The one where he records all his bribes to officials and arrangements with rustlers. Enough to put him away for a long time if it reached the right hands. And has it? Not yet. I was on my way to deliver it when I ran into some complications. He gestured to his wounded side. I see, she said simply, rising to her feet. Well, whatever your business, you won't be conducting it for at least a few days. That wound needs time to heal, and you need to regain your strength. Doc, I appreciate your help, but I can't stay here. Those men will tear apart every building in town looking for me. They already have, she informed him calmly. Sheriff Mills convinced them you must have left town when they weren't watching. They rode out an hour ago to search nearby trails. They'll be back, Hayden warned. Undoubtedly, she agreed. But by then, we'll have moved you somewhere less obvious. For now, you're safe. Before he could argue further, she handed him a small bottle. Laudanum, take it if the pain becomes too severe. I'll return in the morning to check your bandages. You're leaving. He asked, surprised at how much the thought disappointed him. I have other patients, she explained, gathering her book and medical bag. Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house is expecting twins any day now, and old Mr. Simmons has a persistent cough I'm monitoring. She paused at the door. Try to rest, Mr. O'Malley. Doctor's orders. After she'd gone, Hayden lay back against the pillows, considering his situation. He was wounded, hunted, and now indebted to a female doctor with unsettlingly perceptive eyes. Worse scenarios existed, but at the moment, he couldn't think of many. His hand drifted to the inside pocket of his coat, which had been draped over a nearby chair. The small leather-bound ledger was still there, its presence both a relief and a burden. Getting it to Marshal Jenkins in Helena had seemed straightforward when he'd accepted the job from Judge Harmon. Now, with Blackwell's men on his trail and a knife wound slowing him down, The task had become considerably more complicated. Night fell, and with it came the fever. Hayden drifted in and out of consciousness, his dreams filled with pursuing riders and green eyes that saw too much. Once, he thought he felt a cool hand on his forehead and heard a soft voice murmuring reassurances, but he couldn't be sure if it was reality or delusion. When morning light filtered through the curtains, he opened his eyes to find Dr. Lawson checking his bandages, her face pinched with concern. "Your fever broke around dawn," she said when she noticed he was awake. "For a while, I was worried the infection might have progressed further than I thought." "Takes more than a little fever to finish me off," he replied, his voice weak despite his attempt at bravado. "So I've observed," she said, her expression softening slightly. "You have remarkable fortitude, Mr. O'Malley." "Hayden," he corrected. "If you're going to stay up all night saving my life, you might as well use my given name." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Very well, Hayden. And you may call me Sophia, though most in town still refer to me as Dr. Lawson." "How did a female doctor end up in Sloan, Montana?" he asked as she helped him sit up to drink some water. "The same way most people end up in places like this," she replied. "I was looking for somewhere to start over." She busied herself with replacing his bandages, her touch professional but gentle. "The town had no doctor and I needed patients. It was a practical arrangement." "And do they accept you? A woman doctor?" "They had little choice at first," she admitted. "There was a diphtheria outbreak the winter I arrived. After I saved a dozen children, including the mayor's son, most objections faded." Her hands stilled momentarily. "Though some remain convinced a woman's place is in the home, not the surgery." There was a story there, Hayden sensed, but before he could inquire further, a sharp knock came at the clinic door. Sophia quickly finished securing his bandage and moved to answer it, leaving Hayden to hastily pull the blanket higher to cover his bare chest. He heard a man's voice, too low to make out the words, in Sophia's measured response. A moment later, she returned with Sheriff Mills, a weathered man with a salt and pepper mustache and keen eyes that missed little. "Mr. O'Malley." The sheriff greeted him with a nod. "Glad to see you're still with us, Sheriff," Hayden acknowledged cautiously. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Just checking in," Mills replied, though his casual tone didn't match his vigilant posture. "Doc Lawson here says you had quite a night. Nothing I couldn't handle." The sheriff harumphed. "That remains to be seen. Blackwell's men returned this morning. They're staying at the hotel, claiming they're just passing through, but they're asking questions all over town. About me. About a man fitting your description, yes. They're offering a substantial reward for information." Hayden exchanged a look with Sophia, who had moved to stand near the window, her arms crossed. "As I told the sheriff," she said, "you're in no condition to travel." "And as I told the doctor," Mills countered, "keeping him here puts her at risk. Harboring a wanted man, I'm not wanted by the law," Hayden interrupted. "At least not in this territory." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "That's not exactly reassuring, son." "What Mr. O'Malley means," Sophia interceded smoothly, "is that these men have no legal authority. They're hired guns, not lawmen." "That may be," Mills conceded, "but Victor Blackwell has friends in high places. I can't afford to openly defy him without cause." "Would evidence of his criminal activities provide sufficient cause?" Hayden asked quietly, the sheriff's eyes narrowed. "What kind of evidence?" Hayden hesitated, then made a decision. "In my coat pocket. A ledger detailing bribes to officials, arrangements with rustlers, even orders for 2 murders. I was taking it to Marshal Jenkins in Helena when I got sidetracked." Mills retrieved the small book and flipped through it, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is Blackwell's hand. And his signature on multiple entries," Hayden confirmed. Judge Harmon in Cheyenne hired me to retrieve it after Blackwell's conviction fell apart due to missing evidence and witnesses who suddenly recanted. So you're what, a bounty hunter? Sometimes, Hayden admitted. Other times, I retrieve stolen property, find missing persons, or gather evidence when traditional means fail. The sheriff closed the ledger with a thoughtful expression. This changes things, but it doesn't solve our immediate problem. Blackwell's men are still here, and they're not leaving without you or this book. I have an idea, Sophia said suddenly. Both men turned to her. The Peterson homestead is vacant while the family is staying in town awaiting the twins' birth. It's remote enough to be secure but close enough for me to continue treating Hayden. Mills considered this. It could work, especially if we let it be known that O'Malley left on the morning stage. Can I trust you with this, Sheriff? Hayden asked, nodding toward the ledger. The lawman's face hardened. Victor Blackwell tried to buy me once. I declined. Cost me my position in Wyoming territory. I'd like nothing better than to see him face justice. Then we have an arrangement, Sophia declared with finality. Sheriff Mills will spread word that Hayden left town, while simultaneously sending a telegram to Marshal Jenkins. I'll move Hayden to the Peterson place tonight under cover of darkness. And I'll keep hold of this, Mills added, tucking the ledger into his vest. Safer if it's not found on either of you. After the sheriff departed, Sophia busied herself gathering medical supplies and essentials for their relocation. Hayden watched her efficient movements, admiring the quiet competence in every action. "Thank you," he said finally. "You're taking a considerable risk for a stranger." She paused in her preparations, regarding him thoughtfully. "I took an oath to heal the sick and injured. I don't recall an exception for charming rogues with dangerous ledgers." "Charming," he repeated with a grin. "Don't let it go to your head," she advised dryly. "I've noticed your tendency to hide behind that smile of yours." His expression faltered momentarily. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you use charm like armor, Hayden O'Malley. You maintain that easy smile even when you're in tremendous pain." "It's an effective deflection, but not with me." Her green eyes held his steadily. "I'm trained to see past such things." For perhaps the first time in years, Hayden felt truly seen, and the sensation was both unnerving and oddly liberating. He attempted another smile, then let it fade naturally when he realized the futility. "Force of habit," he admitted quietly. "In my line of work, showing weakness is an invitation to disaster." "And in mine," she replied, "concealing symptoms only complicates treatment." She approached the bed, her expression softening. "Rest now. We move at nightfall." That evening, Sheriff Mills arrived with a wagon, its bed filled with straw and covered with a canvas tarp. With the lawman's help, Sophia managed to get Hayden settled underneath the covering, though the effort left him pale and sweating from pain. "The Peterson place is about 3 miles east of town," Mills explained as he assisted Sophia onto the wagon seat. "Keep to the back roads." "I've arranged for Deputy Tucker to create a distraction at the saloon to keep Blackwell's men occupied." "And the ledger?" Hayden asked from beneath the tarp. "Safe," Mills assured him. "I've made my own copy of the pertinent details and hidden the original." Marshal Jenkins should arrive within 2 days, assuming the telegram reaches him promptly. The journey to the Peterson homestead was excruciating for Hayden, every bump and dip in the road sending fresh waves of pain through his injured side. By the time they arrived, he was barely conscious, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool evening air. The small cabin stood dark and silent, surrounded by a meadow that glowed silver in the moonlight. Sheriff Mills quickly lit lamps inside while Sophia tended to Hayden, whose wound had begun bleeding again during the jarring ride. "His stitches have held, thankfully," she reported as they settled him on the cabin's only bed. "But the strain has set back his recovery. Will he be all right here?" Mills asked, concern evident in his gruff voice. Sophia nodded firmly. "I'll stay with him. I've brought sufficient supplies and the Petersons keep a well-stocked root cellar. I'll check on you when I can," the sheriff promised, "but it's best if my visits aren't too frequent. Might draw attention." After Mills departed, Sophia set about making the cabin habitable. She stoked the fire in the small stove, prepared a simple broth, and created a pallet for herself near the hearth. Through it all, Hayden drifted in and out of awareness, his fever returning with the night. In his lucid moments, he watched her move about the cabin, her presence a curious comfort in his vulnerable state. When the pain became unbearable, she offered laudanum, but he refused all but the smallest dose, wary of the drug's effects. "You're being stubborn," she chided gently as she changed his bandages in the dim lamplight. "There's no medal for enduring unnecessary suffering. Need to keep my wits," he managed through clenched teeth. "Your wits won't matter if infection sets in again," she countered, applying a pungent salve to the wound. The sharp smell of herbs filled the small room. "This is willow bark and yarrow. It will help with both the pain and healing." As she worked, her fingers brushed against old scars that marked his torso, testament to a life lived dangerously. She paused at a particularly jagged one near his collarbone. "Knife?" she inquired professionally. "Arrow," he corrected. "Crow brave who objected to my presence on his hunting grounds. Can't say I blamed him." Her eyes met his briefly. "You have quite a collection." "Hazards of the profession," he repeated his earlier explanation. "Your profession seems unusually hazardous," she observed, securing the fresh bandage. "What led you to it?" The question hung between them in the quiet cabin. Outside, an owl called into the night. "Necessity at first," he finally answered. "Talent later." He shifted slightly to ease the pressure on his wound. After the war, there weren't many options for a former scout with no land and no trade. I discovered I had a knack for finding things and people that didn't want to be found. "You fought in the war, scouted for the Union," he confirmed. "Spent most of it in Tennessee and Georgia. Learned how to move unseen and gather information, useful skills afterward." "And is it rewarding work?" she asked, her tone neutral. Hayden considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. When I'm retrieving stolen property for its rightful owner, or helping reunite families separated by circumstance. Other times." He trailed off, thinking of darker assignments. "Let's just say I've become more selective about my clients in recent years." "Hence working for a judge against a powerful man like Blackwell." "Exactly." He managed a small smile. "Redemption pays poorly, but I sleep better." Sophia regarded him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're an unexpected man, Hayden O'Malley." "I could say the same about you, Dr. Lawson." Though unexpected woman would be more accurate, that earned him the hint of a smile. "Rest now. Morning comes early and we have at least a day before the sheriff returns." The next day passed slowly. Hayden's condition improved marginally, enough that he could sit up and take broth and bread without assistance. Sophia spent the morning examining him and changing his dressings, then busied herself around the cabin, taking inventory of supplies and reading from a medical journal she'd brought with her. By afternoon, Hayden was restless. "Tell me about yourself," he suggested as Sophia sat near the window, using the natural light to mend a tear in one of her sleeves. "How does a woman become a doctor in these times?" She didn't look up from her stitching. "With difficulty." "I gathered that much," he replied dryly. "I'm asking for the story, not the summary." Her hand stilled, and for a moment he thought she might refuse. Then she sighed, setting aside her mending. "My father was a physician in Philadelphia," she began. "A good one, dedicated to his patients regardless of their station or ability to pay. He had no sons, only me, and from an early age I accompanied him on his rounds." A fond smile touched her lips. He believed a woman could have just as keen a mind as any man. When the Women's Medical College opened, he encouraged me to apply. Were there many women studying medicine? "A small but determined group," she confirmed. "We faced constant ridicule, of course. Male medical students would follow us to classes, mocking our ambitions and sometimes throwing trash. Professors either ignored us entirely or subjected us to humiliating questioning." Her jaw tightened at the memories. "But we persevered. What brought you west after your training?" Hayden asked. A shadow crossed her face. "My father died during my final year of studies, pneumonia. I couldn't save him." The admission seemed to cost her something vital. After graduation, there were few practices willing to accept a female physician, regardless of qualifications. Those that did offered only the most menial positions. "So you came to Montana, where doctors of any gender would be welcome." "Initially to Denver," she corrected. "I worked with a senior physician there for 2 years. It was an educational experience." Something in her tone suggested the education had been painful. "When an opportunity arose to establish my own practice in Montana territory, I seized it." "And Sloan has benefited from Denver's loss," Hayden observed sincerely. She acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod. "The town has been generally accepting, especially after the diphtheria outbreak proved my worth. Though there are still those who prefer to suffer rather than be treated by a woman." "Their loss," Hayden said, then winced as he shifted position too quickly. Sophia was instantly on her feet, moving to his side. "Let me see," she insisted, already reaching for his bandage. "It's nothing," he protested. "Just moved wrong." "Let me be the judge of that," she replied firmly, her doctor's authority brooking no argument. As she unwound the bandage to examine the wound, Hayden found himself studying her face. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, evidence of both laughter and worry, and a small scar near her temple that he hadn't noticed before. Her hands were capable and strong, yet remarkably gentle as they probed his injury. "The inflammation has decreased," she announced, sounding pleased. "But you've pulled one stitch. I'll need to replace it." She gathered her medical bag and set about preparing a needle and thread. Hayden braced himself for the additional pain, determined not to flinch under her ministrations. "This will hurt," she warned, poising the needle. "I trust you," he replied simply. Something flickered in her eyes at his words, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he couldn't name. Then her professional demeanor returned as she focused on the task. The needle pierced his skin, and Hayden gritted his teeth against the sharp sting. Sophia worked quickly, her movements precise and efficient. When she finished, she applied more of the herbal salve and wrapped a fresh bandage around his torso. "You should lie back now," she instructed, gathering her supplies. "No more sudden movements." "Yes, doctor," he agreed with mock solemnity. She shook her head at his teasing tone but couldn't quite suppress a smile. "I'm beginning to understand how you've survived this long, despite your dangerous profession. That charm must be quite effective." "Not with everyone," he admitted, thinking of the men hunting him. "And apparently not with you." "I didn't say that," she replied, surprising him with her candidness. "I merely said I can see past it to what you're hiding." "And what am I hiding, Dr. Lawson?" he asked, suddenly serious. She met his gaze directly. "Pain, loneliness, the weight of choices that haunt you." She replaced her medical instruments in her bag with methodical care. "The same things most of us hide, I suppose. You're just more practiced at the concealment." Her insight left him momentarily speechless. In his line of work, being easily read could prove fatal, yet this woman had dismantled his carefully constructed facade within days of meeting him. Before he could formulate a response, a sound outside the cabin froze them both: the distant but unmistakable approach of horses. "Sheriff Mills," Sophia whispered, moving to the window. Hayden shook his head, already reaching for his gun on the nearby table. "Too soon and too many horses." Sophia peered carefully through the curtain. "3 riders," she confirmed, her voice tense. "Coming fast. Blackwell's men," Hayden concluded grimly. "They must have followed Mills or tracked the wagon somehow." He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, fighting through the pain. "You need to leave, now." "I'm not leaving you," she protested, already gathering essential medical supplies. "Sophia, these men won't hesitate to hurt you. I can handle them. In your condition, you can barely stand," she pointed out, practical even in crisis. "And even if you could fight, it's 3 against 1. The sound of hooves grew louder. They had minutes at most. "There must be a back way out," Hayden insisted, struggling to his feet. "Through the root cellar," Sophia confirmed. "It has an exterior entrance for winter access." "But you're not going anywhere without help." Before he could argue further, she was at his side, slipping her shoulder under his arm to support his weight. Together, they moved as quickly as possible toward a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. "Down there," she directed, already lifting the heavy wooden door. Rough-hewn steps led into darkness. Hayden could make out the shapes of preserved food and supplies on shelves carved into the earth walls. Sophia helped him navigate the steep stairs, then retrieved a small lantern and matches from a hook near the entrance. The root cellar was cool and smelled of earth and stored vegetables. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with jars of preserved fruits, vegetables, and meats that would sustain the Peterson family through winter. At the far end, a narrow tunnel led to what Hayden assumed was the external entrance Sophia had mentioned. Above them, the sound of horses arriving was followed by men's voices, too muffled to make out words but clear enough to convey their intention. "They'll search the cabin," Hayden whispered as Sophia lit the lantern, keeping the flame low. "Then we should be gone before they think to check the cellar," she replied, her calm demeanor impressive given the circumstances. They made their way through the cramped space to the exterior entrance, a slanted door that opened onto the meadow behind the cabin. Hayden's wound throbbed with every movement, but adrenaline dulled the worst of the pain as they reached the exit. "Wait," Sophia cautioned, extinguishing the lantern. "Listen first." They fell silent, straining to hear any indication of men outside the cellar doors. After a tense moment, Sophia carefully pushed against one of the doors, creating just enough space to peer out into the meadow. "Clear," she whispered. Together they pushed the doors open and emerged into the gathering dusk. The meadow stretched before them, ending at a line of trees perhaps 200 yards away. Behind them, sounds of the search grew louder, furniture being overturned, doors slamming. The forest, Sophia decided, already supporting Hayden's weight as they began moving across the open ground. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a shout from the cabin signaled they'd been spotted. Hayden glanced back to see one of Blackwell's men emerging from the house, pointing in their direction. "Run," he urged Sophia. "I'll hold them off." "Don't be absurd," she snapped, tightening her grip on him as they stumbled forward. "I'm not leaving you to die." The first gunshot cracked across the meadow, the bullet whining past them and striking a tree at the forest's edge. Sophia flinched, but didn't slow, her determination lending Hayden strength he didn't know he possessed. They reached the trees as more shots rang out, finding cover among the pines as darkness deepened around them. Hayden's breathing came in harsh gasps, his side a blaze of agony as they pushed deeper into the forest. "We need to find somewhere to hide," Sophia panted. "You can't keep going like this." She was right. Already his vision was narrowing, black spots dancing at the edges as his body protested the exertion. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers crashing through the underbrush, closing the distance. "There," Sophia whispered suddenly, nodding toward a fallen tree. Its massive trunk had created a hollow where it had been uprooted, partially concealed by ferns and forest debris. They crawled into the space, pressing themselves against the earthen wall where the roots had torn from the ground. Hayden's gun was in his hand, though he had little hope of fending off 3 determined men in his condition. Minutes passed like hours as they huddled in silence, listening to their pursuers moving through the forest. Occasionally, a voice would call out, "Over here," or "Check that clearing." But gradually, the sounds grew more distant. "I think they're moving away from us," Sophia breathed, barely audible even inches from Hayden's ear. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak through the pain that now consumed his awareness. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him shaking and disoriented. He felt Sophia's cool hand against his forehead. "You're burning up," she murmured. "The wound may have reopened. Just need to rest," he managed, his words slurring slightly. "Not here," she insisted. "Once we're sure they're gone, we need to find better shelter. Somewhere I can treat you properly." The forest had grown fully dark now, moonlight filtering through the canopy in silver patches that illuminated their hiding place just enough to see each other's faces. In that ethereal light, Sophia looked otherworldly determined and fierce, despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. "Why are you doing this?" Hayden asked softly. "Risking your life for someone you barely know." She regarded him silently for a long moment. "Because it's the right thing to do," she finally answered. "And because there's something about you worth saving, Hayden O'Malley, even if you don't see it yourself." Her words settled into him like stones dropping into still water, creating ripples that disturbed long, quiet depths. Before he could respond, however, a twig snapped nearby and both froze. Footsteps approached their hiding place, deliberate and unhurried. A lantern's glow preceded its bearer, casting long shadows among the trees. Hayden raised his gun, prepared to sell his life dearly if necessary. "Doc." "O'Malley," a familiar voice called softly. "It's Mills." Relief flooded through them as the sheriff's weathered face appeared in the lantern light. "Thank God," Sophia breathed, already helping Hayden from their concealment. "Blackwell's men?" Hayden asked as Mills helped support him. "Headed back toward town," the lawman confirmed. "I followed at a distance when I saw them riding this way, waited until they moved deeper into the forest before coming to find you." He glanced at Hayden's pale face. "You look like hell, son." "Feels appropriate," Hayden replied weakly. "We need to get him somewhere safe," Sophia insisted. "The wound's been aggravated and he's feverish again." Mills nodded grimly. "My cabin. It's about a mile from here, well off the main roads. No one will think to look there." The journey to Sheriff Mills's cabin passed in a blur for Hayden, who was only partially conscious by the time they arrived. He was vaguely aware of being helped onto a bed, of Sophia's urgent voice directing Mills to boil water and find clean linens, of her cool hands working at his bandages. "Stay with me, Hayden," she kept saying, her voice an anchor in the sea of pain and confusion that threatened to drown him. "Just hold on." Hours or minutes later, he couldn't tell which the worst of the pain receded, replaced by a floating sensation he recognized as laudanum taking effect. Sophia's face swam into focus above him, her features drawn with exhaustion but her eyes alert and professional. "The stitches held," she was telling someone, Mills, presumably, "but the exertion caused internal bleeding. I've managed to stop it, I think, but he's very weak. Will he make it? The sheriff's voice asked from somewhere beyond Hayden's field of vision. If we can prevent infection and keep him still long enough to heal properly, yes. What about Blackwell's men? They'll be back, Sophia said with certainty. They're too determined to give up easily. Marshal Jenkins should arrive tomorrow, Mills replied. Once he has the ledger and O'Malley's testimony, he can arrest them for attempted murder at the very least. Their voices faded as the laudanum pulled Hayden deeper into unconsciousness. His last coherent thought was of Sophia's words in the forest. There's something about you worth saving. He woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. For a moment, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, he tensed, reaching instinctively for his gun before memory returned. Mills's cabin. Safety, at least temporarily. Easy, came Sophia's voice from nearby. You're safe. She sat in a chair beside the bed, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. Dark circles beneath her eyes testified to a night spent watching over him rather than resting. How long? He asked, his voice rough with sleep. About 14 hours, she replied, setting aside her cup to help him sit up. It's just past noon. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo, he admitted. But better than yesterday. Your fever broke around dawn, she told him, pouring water from a pitcher on the bedside table. Drink this. You need to replace the fluids you've lost. He accepted the water gratefully, noticing as he did that his bandages had been changed again, and he was wearing a clean shirt that must belong to Mills. The sheriff, he inquired after drinking. In town, maintaining appearances. He'll return this evening with news about Marshal Jenkins. She hesitated, and hopefully about Blackwell's men as well. They're still searching, Hayden guessed. Sophia nodded, her expression grave. According to Mills, they're offering an even larger reward now. They've also sent for reinforcements from Blackwell's ranch. How many? He didn't know exactly. At least 5 more men, possibly arriving today. Hayden absorbed this information grimly. Even with Mills and the marshal, they would be outnumbered if Blackwell's full contingent descended on Sloan. And while his condition had improved, he was far from fighting form. We should leave, he decided. The 3 of us, before the reinforcements arrive, get the ledger to Helena ourselves. You're in no condition to travel, Sophia objected immediately. The bleeding has stopped, but any significant exertion could reopen the wound. And if we stay, we risk being found, he countered. Blackwell's men won't give up easily, not with what's at stake. The ledger is evidence of crimes that could hang him. Then Mills should take it alone. You can testify once you've recovered. Hayden shook his head. The ledger without testimony could be claimed as forgery. And there's no guarantee Mills would make it to Helena alone, with so many men hunting the evidence. Sophia studied him thoughtfully, her professional assessment warring with the practicalities of their situation. You truly believe our position is that precarious? I've crossed paths with Blackwell's type before, Hayden confirmed. Men who have built empires on others' suffering don't relinquish power willingly. He'll burn Sloan to the ground if necessary to recover that ledger. She sighed, conceding the point. Then we wait for Mills. If the marshal is truly arriving today, perhaps he'll bring additional deputies. Let's hope so, Hayden agreed, though doubt gnawed at him. In his experience, help rarely arrived in sufficient quantity or at the opportune moment. They spent the afternoon in uneasy vigilance. Sophia checking Hayden's wound periodically while he cleaned and loaded Mills's spare revolver. Despite her objections to his movement, she recognized the necessity of preparation and helped him fashion a sling that would allow him to draw and fire with minimal strain on his injury. As evening approached with no sign of Mills, their concern grew. The cabin was situated in a small clearing, with enough visibility in all directions to prevent anyone approaching unseen in daylight. As shadows lengthened, however, that advantage diminished. "He should have been back by now," Sophia observed, peering through the window for the 20th time that hour. "Something's wrong," Hayden agreed, struggling to his feet despite her disapproving look. "Help me outside. I want to check the perimeter before dark." Together, they made a slow circuit of the cabin's exterior, finding nothing amiss but unable to shake the sense of impending danger. As they completed their inspection, the distant sound of an approaching horse brought them both to alert attention. "Mills," Sophia suggested hopefully. Hayden shook his head, drawing the revolver from its holster. "Too fast. Mills would be more cautious." They retreated to the cabin's porch, Hayden positioning himself to protect Sophia while maintaining a clear view of the approaching rider. As the horse and rider emerged from the trees, however, tension gave way to surprise. "Deputy Tucker," Sophia identified the young man who rode into the clearing at a gallop, his face flushed with exertion. The deputy reined in sharply, nearly tumbling from his saddle in his haste to dismount. "Doc Lawson, thank God you're here. Sheriff Mills sent me. You both need to leave immediately." "What's happened?" Hayden demanded, not lowering his weapon. "Blackwell's men captured a telegram from Marshal Jenkins," Tucker explained breathlessly. "They know he's coming. They've set an ambush on the main road from Helena." "And Mills?" Sophia asked anxiously. "They're holding him at the jail," the deputy admitted, shame coloring his features. "Overpowered us both this morning. They're claiming he's under arrest for interfering with their lawful pursuit of a thief." "That's absurd," Sophia protested. "They have no authority." "They showed papers," Tucker replied grimly. "Deputized by the Wyoming Territorial Marshal, authorizing them to apprehend Hayden O'Malley for theft and recover stolen property." "Forgeries," Hayden stated with certainty. "Blackwell's reach is extensive, but even he couldn't arrange official papers this quickly." "Sheriff thought the same," Tucker agreed. "That's why he told me where to find you, said to tell you to head for Fort Benton. There's a federal judge there who can authenticate the ledger and issue proper warrants for Blackwell." The deputy's horse snorted and stamped, sensing its rider's urgency. Tucker glanced nervously over his shoulder. "I need to get back before they realize I'm gone. They think I'm checking outlying farms for you." "What about Mills?" Hayden asked. "He said not to worry about him. Said getting that ledger to the judge is all that matters now." After Tucker departed, Hayden and Sophia wasted no time gathering essentials for the journey. Fort Benton lay nearly 100 miles northeast, a challenging journey even for someone in peak condition, potentially deadly for a man with a recently reopened wound. "We'll need to pace ourselves," Sophia insisted as she packed medical supplies. "Your body can't withstand another hemorrhage." "We'll have to balance speed against caution," Hayden agreed, checking the ammunition for both revolvers. "If Blackwell's men realize we're headed for Fort Benton, they'll pursue." Mills had left them 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, sure-footed mare that Sophia claimed as her mount. They packed lightly, taking only what was essential for survival and treatment of Hayden's wound. By nightfall, they were ready to depart. Under a waxing moon, they rode eastward, avoiding main trails and keeping to terrain that would make tracking difficult. Hayden led the way, drawing on skills honed during his scouting days. Despite his injury, he remained alert, constantly scanning for signs of pursuit or danger. Sophia rode beside him when the trail allowed, her concern evident in the frequent glances she cast his way. To her credit, she made no complaint about the pace or conditions, matching his determination with her own quiet resolve. They made camp near midnight in a sheltered ravine, building only the smallest fire necessary to prepare a meager meal and heat water for Sophia to clean Hayden's wound. "How is it?" he asked as she examined the injury by firelight. "Better than I expected, given the circumstances," she admitted. "The bleeding has stayed minimal. You've been careful with your movements." "Had a good teacher," he replied with a small smile. She returned the smile briefly before her expression grew serious again. "Hayden, we need to discuss what happens when we reach Fort Benton. We present the ledger and my testimony to the judge," he stated simply. "With luck, he'll dispatch federal marshals to arrest Blackwell and rescue Mills." "And after that," she pressed, "what will you do? Return to your acquisitions?" The question caught him off guard, not because he hadn't considered it, but because he realized he no longer had a clear answer. The past days with Sophia had stirred something long dormant, a longing for connection, for purpose beyond the next job. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "For years, I've lived day to day, job to job. It suited me, or at least I told myself it did." "And now?" she prompted softly. He met her gaze across the small fire. "Now I'm not so sure." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled only with the crackling of the fire and the night sounds of the wilderness. Hayden found himself studying her profile, the way the firelight caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the determined set of her jaw that softened when she was at ease. "Why did you really come west, Sophia?" he asked suddenly. "There's more to your story than professional opportunity." She stiffened slightly, her hands stilling in their task of reorganizing her medical bag. For a moment he thought she might deflect the question, but then she sighed. "I was engaged," she revealed quietly, "to another physician in Philadelphia. He objected to my continuing to practice medicine after our marriage. When I refused to abandon my profession, he ended our engagement." "His loss," Hayden observed. "It wasn't just him," she continued, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "His family, my friends, even some of my patients, they all seemed to think I was being unreasonable, that I should be grateful a respectable man would consider marrying a woman doctor at all." She shook her head at the memory. "After my father died, there was nothing keeping me there. So I came west, where I hoped my skills would matter more than my gender." "And have they?" "Mostly," she acknowledged. "There are still those who doubt, who whisper behind my back about unnatural ambitions. But when a child is choking or a man is bleeding, few refuse help because it comes from a woman's hands." "You've built something remarkable in Sloan," Hayden said with genuine admiration. "The town is fortunate to have you." "I've wondered lately if it's enough," she admitted, surprising him with her candor. "Saving lives one at a time while men like Blackwell destroy dozens through their greed and corruption." "Is that why you're helping me? To fight a larger battle?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "Partly, but also because—" She hesitated, then met his eyes directly. "Because I recognized something in you from the first moment in that saloon, something hidden behind that practiced smile." "What did you see?" he asked, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper. "A good man carrying wounds that go deeper than flesh," she answered simply. "One who uses charm to deflect attention from his pain, just as I use professional detachment to shield myself from mine." The truth of her words struck him like a physical blow. Few people in his life had seen past the facade. He'd so carefully constructed the carefree rogue, the charming drifter who never stayed long enough for attachments to form. "Let me stitch what you won't show," she said softly, echoing words she'd spoken when first treating his wound. "Some things can't be stitched, Doc," he replied, attempting to resurrect his usual light-hearted tone and failing utterly. "Perhaps not," she agreed. "But acknowledging the wound is the first step to healing." Before he could respond, the sound of a distant horse brought them both to alert attention. Hayden immediately doused the fire while Sophia gathered their essential belongings. They listened intently, trying to determine direction and number, but the sounds faded rather than approaching. After several tense minutes, Hayden relaxed marginally. "Probably just a traveler on the main trail," he suggested, "but we should move on to be safe." Despite the interruption, something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of deeper currents beneath their practical alliance. As they rode through the night, Hayden found himself acutely aware of Sophia's presence beside him, a steadying force in more ways than the physical support she'd provided for his injury. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles, a respectable distance given the difficult terrain and Hayden's condition. They made camp in a dense copse of trees near a small stream, concealed from casual observation. "We should rest for a few hours," Sophia insisted, noting Hayden's increasing pallor. "You need sleep, and so do the horses." Too exhausted to argue, Hayden allowed her to help him from his saddle. They created a simple camp, using their bedrolls but foregoing a fire despite the morning chill. Sophia checked his wound, applied fresh salve, and gave him water and jerky from their provisions before insisting he rest. "What about you?" he asked, noticing the fatigue evident in her features. "I'll keep watch," she assured him. "Sleep now. We have many miles yet to cover." Despite his intention to stay alert, exhaustion claimed him almost immediately. He dreamed of green eyes and gentle hands, of a life beyond the next job and the next town. He woke to Sophia's hand on his shoulder, her expression tense. "Riders," she whispered, "coming from the west." Instantly alert, Hayden listened. The sound of multiple horses approaching was unmistakable. "How many?" "At least 4, maybe more," she replied. "I spotted them from that rise." She nodded toward a small hill beyond their camp. "They're following our trail." Cursing silently, Hayden struggled to his feet. "We need to move. Now." They packed swiftly, erasing signs of their camp as best they could before mounting. The horses, only partially rested, protested but responded to their urgent commands. "There's a river about 5 miles east," Hayden said as they rode. "If we can reach it, we can use it to hide our trail." They pushed their mounts hard, aware that their pursuers were gaining ground with every passing minute. The sound of hoofbeats grew steadily louder behind them as they raced across open country toward the tree line that marked the river's course. They were still a half-mile from the river when the first shot rang out. Sophia's horse screamed and stumbled, a bullet having grazed its flank. She managed to keep her seat as the animal recovered, but the incident confirmed their peril. "Go," Hayden shouted, drawing his revolver and turning his mount to provide covering fire. "Get to the river. I'll hold them off." "Not without you," she called back, slowing her injured mount. "Sophia, for God's sake, go," he urged, firing toward their pursuers who were now visible on the horizon behind them. The ledger is what matters. For a moment, she seemed torn between duty and emotion. Then, with visible reluctance, she spurred her horse toward the river. Hayden fired twice more, forcing their pursuers to scatter briefly, before turning to follow. They reached the river moments before Blackwell's men would have overtaken them. Without hesitation, they urged their horses into the swift current, the animals swimming strongly toward the opposite bank. Behind them, more shots rang out, bullets striking the water around them. Once across, they rode north along the riverbank, staying within the tree line for cover. Their horses were tiring rapidly, the pace and river crossing having taken a toll on their stamina. "We can't outrun them much longer," Sophia observed, glancing back at the men now crossing the river in pursuit. "We don't need to," Hayden replied, pointing ahead to where the river bent sharply around a rocky outcropping. "There's a cave system there used by fur trappers in the old days. We can lose them in the tunnels." They abandoned their exhausted horses near the river, removing only what they could carry. Hayden led the way to a narrow opening in the rock face, partially concealed by vegetation. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the sound of running water echoed from somewhere deep within. "Stay close," he warned as they ventured deeper, using a small lantern from their supplies to illuminate the way. "It's easy to get lost in here." The cave system was more extensive than Sophia had anticipated, with multiple tunnels branching off from the main passage. Hayden navigated with surprising confidence, selecting paths based on markers only he could recognize. "You've been here before," she realized. He nodded. "During the war." A group of Confederate deserters was using these caves as a hideout. My unit was sent to flush them out. His expression darkened at the memory. It didn't end well for either side. They continued deeper into the labyrinth until they reached a small chamber with a natural spring bubbling from the rock wall. Hayden extinguished their lantern. "We'll wait here," he whispered. "Even if they find the entrance, they'll never navigate the tunnels in the dark." In the absolute darkness of the cave, they sat close together, listening for sounds of pursuit. Minutes stretched into an hour with no indication that Blackwell's men had followed them into the caves. "How long should we wait?" Sophia asked softly, her voice barely audible. "Until nightfall at least," Hayden replied. "Give them time to search elsewhere or assume we've continued north." In the darkness, other senses heightened. Hayden was acutely aware of Sophia's breath, the subtle scent of her hair, the warmth of her shoulder against his. Without visual distractions, the intimacy of their situation intensified. "Are you in pain?" she asked after a period of silence. "Some," he admitted. "The ride was taxing." He felt her shift beside him, heard the rustle of her medical bag being opened. "Let me check your wound." "You can't see it," he pointed out. "I don't need to see to feel if it's hot or swollen," she countered practically. "Besides, we should relight the lantern for a few minutes. We need water and I want to apply more salve." Reluctantly, he agreed. The small flame illuminated the chamber, revealing a space perhaps 15 feet in diameter with a ceiling just high enough to stand beneath. The spring formed a small pool before disappearing into a crack in the opposite wall. Sophia helped him remove his shirt and examined the wound with practiced hands. "It's holding," she announced with evident relief. "No significant bleeding, though there's some inflammation from exertion." As she applied the salve, her touch lingered longer than strictly necessary for medical purposes. Hayden watched her face in the lantern light, struck by how the flame accentuated the delicate contours of her features. "Sophia," he said quietly, capturing her hand with his own. "If we don't make it to Fort Benton—" "We will," she interrupted firmly. "But if we don't," he persisted, "I want you to know that meeting you has changed something in me, something I thought was long dead." Her expression softened, professional detachment giving way to something more vulnerable. "And what is that, hope?" he answered simply. "For a life beyond the next job in the next town, for connections that last beyond necessity." She was silent for a long moment, her hand still in his. "I've spent years building walls," she finally said, "protecting myself from those who would diminish me for being a woman who dares to be more than society permits. It's easier to be Dr. Lawson than Sophia." Her eyes met his, revealing an unexpected openness. "But with you, I find myself wanting to be both." The confession hung between them, a bridge spanning distances neither had intended to cross when their paths first intersected in Sloan. Hayden reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was so simple, yet more intimate than any they had shared before. "When this is over," he said softly, "when Blackwell is facing justice and Mills is safe." "What then?" "I don't know," she admitted. My life is in Sloan. My patients need me. And my life has been wherever the next job takes me, he acknowledged. Not much foundation for anything more. Perhaps, she suggested, a tentative smile touching her lips, we could reconsider our definitions of life and need. Before he could respond, a distant sound froze them, both voices echoing through the tunnels, far off but unmistakable. They found the entrance, Hayden whispered, immediately extinguishing the lantern. Darkness enveloped them once more. We need to move deeper. Guided only by Hayden's memory of the cave system and occasionally feeling their way along the walls, they ventured further into the labyrinth. The voices behind them grew fainter as they navigated through increasingly narrow passages. There should be another exit, Hayden explained in hushed tones as they paused to rest. Used by the trappers to escape if hostile tribes discovered the main entrance. If we can find it, we can circle back to the river and continue north. They pressed on, the darkness absolute except for brief moments when Hayden risked the lantern to confirm their route at critical junctions. The air grew cooler and damper as they descended, suggesting they were moving deeper underground. After what seemed hours of careful progress, they reached a chamber where the sound of rushing water was pronounced. Hayden lit the lantern briefly, revealing a narrow underground stream cutting across their path. "This is it," he said with evident relief. "The stream leads to the secondary exit. We follow it downstream." The going was treacherous, the rocks slippery, the ceiling low enough in places that they had to crouch or crawl. Hayden's wound protested every awkward movement, but the alternative of capture by Blackwell's men drove him forward. Eventually, the passage began to lighten subtly. The ambient darkness shifted from absolute to merely deep shadow, indicating natural light somewhere ahead. Soon, they could make out the outline of a narrow fissure where the underground stream emerged into open air. Cautiously, they approached the exit, alert for signs that their pursuers might have anticipated this escape route. The opening was partially concealed by thick vegetation, offering both protection and limited visibility. "Wait here," Hayden instructed, peering through the greenery. "Let me make sure it's clear." He squeezed through the narrow opening, every sense alert for danger. Outside, late afternoon sunlight filtered through a dense canopy of trees. The cave's exit emerged on a steep, forested hillside above the river, well concealed from casual observation. After confirming they were alone, he signaled Sophia to join him. She emerged from the cave looking exhausted but resolute, her clothing damp and mud streaked from their underground journey. "Where are we?" she asked quietly, orienting herself to their new surroundings. "About 2 miles downstream from where we entered," Hayden estimated. "With luck, Blackwell's men are still searching the main cave system." They descended carefully to the river, where Hayden took time to properly assess their situation. Their horses were gone, either captured by their pursuers or fled. They had limited supplies, some food, Sophia's medical kit, their weapons, and the crucial ledger, which Hayden had kept secure in an inner pocket of his coat. "Fort Benton is still at least 70 miles northeast," he calculated grimly. "Without horses, it will take days." "Then we'd better start walking," Sophia replied pragmatically. "Unless you have another plan," Hayden studied the river thoughtfully. "There's a trading post about 10 miles north. River's Edge, they call it. If we can reach it by nightfall, we might secure fresh horses or even passage on a supply boat headed for Fort Benton." They set out immediately, following the river but staying within the tree line for cover. The going was difficult, uneven terrain, dense underbrush, and the constant need to remain vigilant for pursuit. Hayden's wound throbbed persistently, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing instead on their goal and the woman beside him. Sophia maintained a pace that would have impressed seasoned frontiersmen, her determination evident in every step. Occasionally, she would insist on brief rests, ostensibly for herself, but clearly monitoring Hayden's condition during these pauses. As dusk approached, the distant outline of buildings became visible through the tree's river's edge trading post. They paused at the forest's edge, observing the settlement carefully before approaching. The trading post consisted of several log structures clustered near the river, where a small dock accommodated boats bringing supplies from Fort Benton and points east. A few locals moved about their evening routines, and smoke rose from chimneys against the darkening sky. "Looks peaceful enough," Sophia observed. "Maybe," Hayden agreed cautiously, "but Blackwell's men could have sent riders ahead to watch for us at likely stopping points." They decided to approach separately. Sophia would enter openly, presenting herself as a doctor whose horse had gone lame while traveling to treat a patient. Hayden would remain hidden until she could ascertain whether the post was safe. "Be careful," he urged as she prepared to leave the concealment of the trees. "If anything seems wrong, make an excuse and leave immediately." "I've faced down drunken miners convinced that bloodletting cures everything from gout to lovesickness," she replied with a wry smile. "I think I can handle a few traders." She straightened her clothing as best she could, attempted to tame her wind-blown hair, and stepped confidently from the forest onto the path leading to the trading post. Hayden watched her go with a mixture of admiration and anxiety, struck again by her remarkable courage. From his vantage point, he observed her approach the main building, where she was met by an older man who appeared to be the proprietor. Their conversation seemed amicable, with the man nodding and gesturing toward one of the smaller cabins. After a brief exchange, Sophia followed him inside the main building. Minutes stretched into a half hour with no sign of trouble. As darkness fell completely, Hayden began to consider moving closer when he spotted Sophia emerging from the building. She walked casually to the edge of the settlement, appearing to admire the river view, then slowly made her way toward the trees where he waited. "It's safe," she reported when she reached him. "The owner is Joseph Greeley, a former Army surgeon. When I mentioned I was a physician, he was immediately welcoming." "No sign of Blackwell's men, none," she confirmed. "And better yet, there's a supply boat leaving for Fort Benton at dawn. Greeley has already secured us passage as a professional courtesy to a fellow medical practitioner." Relief washed over Hayden. "That's the first piece of good luck we've had. He's offered us use of a cabin for the night," Sophia continued, "and a proper meal. He also wants to meet you. I told him you were my guard and patient." The trading post proved as welcoming as Sophia had indicated. Joseph Greeley was a gruff but kindly man in his 60s who had established River's Edge after leaving the Army following the war. He asked few questions about their circumstances, but provided clean clothing, a hot meal, and basic supplies for their journey. "Not many female doctors even back east, let alone out here," he remarked as they shared supper in his private quarters above the trading post. "Admirable profession for anyone, doubly so given the obstacles." "You're unusually progressive in your views, Mr. Greeley," Sophia observed. The older man shrugged. "Seen too much death and suffering to care about anything except competence when it comes to medicine. During the war, had a female nurse who could amputate a shattered limb faster and cleaner than most surgeons I knew." He glanced at Hayden. "Speaking of which, the doc mentioned you're nursing a wound. Anything I can help with, doctor?" "Lawson has it well in hand," Hayden assured him, touched by the man's genuine concern. "But thank you." After the meal, Greeley showed them to a small but clean cabin near the river. "Boat leaves at first light," he informed them. Captain Donovan's a good man, reliable. He'll see you safely to Fort Benton." Once alone, Hayden and Sophia took full advantage of the sanctuary they'd found. Clean water allowed for proper washing, and Sophia thoroughly cleaned and redressed Hayden's wound, pleased to find it healing despite their ordeal. "You should be proud of your handiwork, Doc," Hayden commented as she finished securing the fresh bandage. "Most men would be bedridden with an injury like this." "Most men would have had the sense to seek treatment immediately rather than riding for days with an untended wound," she countered, though her tone held more fondness than censure. "If I had," he pointed out, catching her hand as she withdrew it, "we might never have met." The simple touch created a current between them, the barriers of professionalism and caution temporarily suspended in the safety of their private sanctuary. Sophia's eyes met his, no longer guarded by clinical detachment. "A silver lining to your recklessness," she acknowledged softly. "One of many discoveries I've made since arriving in Sloan," he replied, drawing her slightly closer. The kiss, when it came, felt like an inevitability, a natural continuation of the connection that had been building since their first meeting. Sophia's lips were soft against his, hesitant at first, then responding with surprising passion as the moment deepened. When they finally parted, Hayden rested his forehead against hers, unwilling to increase the distance between them. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you in the saloon," he admitted. "Even while bleeding and facing down Blackwell's men," she asked with a small smile. "Especially then," he confirmed. "There's something remarkably attractive about a woman who reads medical journals in a saloon full of roughnecks." She laughed softly, the sound warming him more thoroughly than Greeley's hearty stew had. "And there's something unexpectedly compelling about a thief with a conscience." "Former thief," he corrected. "I think it's time for a career change." "Oh," her eyebrows rose in question. "What did you have in mind?" "I haven't quite figured that out yet," he admitted, "but I'm open to suggestions." "Let's start with surviving the journey to Fort Benton," she proposed practically, though her eyes remained warm with affection. "We can discuss career opportunities once Blackwell is no longer a threat." They slept that night in the simple cabin, sharing the narrow bed out of both necessity and desire for closeness. Despite the intimacy of their kiss, both recognized that Hayden's condition and their precarious situation called for restraint. Instead, they found comfort in proximity, Sophia's head resting on Hayden's good side, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. For the first time in years, Hayden fell asleep without his customary wariness, the woman beside him having somehow bypassed defenses he'd thought impenetrable. His last thought before drifting off was that perhaps Sophia had been right, some wounds could be stitched after all, even those that ran deeper than flesh. Dawn arrived all too soon, heralded by the sound of activity at the dock as the supply boat prepared for departure. They dressed quickly and gathered their few belongings, each stealing glances at the other in the soft morning light, newly aware of the shift in their relationship. "Ready?" Hayden asked as Sophia secured her medical bag. "As I'll ever be," she replied, straightening her shoulders with characteristic determination. "Fort Benton by nightfall, and then this ordeal will finally end." The River Queen was a sturdy stern wheeler that served the settlements along this stretch of the Missouri River. Captain Donovan, a veteran riverman with a weather-beaten face and shrewd eyes, greeted them courteously, but with minimal conversation as they boarded. "Greeley explained your situation," he said simply. "My boat, my rules. No trouble follows aboard the River Queen without consequences." He nodded toward two men armed with rifles stationed at strategic points on the deck. "You'll be safe enough until Fort Benton." The journey began smoothly, the boat's paddle wheel churning the river into white foam as they pulled away from river's edge. Hayden and Sophia found a relatively private spot near the stern where they could observe the shoreline while remaining partially concealed from casual observation from land. For the first hours, the journey was uneventful, even pleasant. The river wound through spectacular country, towering cliffs, dense forests, and occasional open meadows where deer grazed, startled into flight by the boat's approach. Under different circumstances, it might have been idyllic. As midday approached, however, Hayden's vigilance was rewarded by the sight of riders moving parallel to the river, partially visible through the trees. "Captain," he called urgently, pointing toward the shoreline. Donovan followed his gaze, his expression darkening as he spotted the riders. "Friends of yours?" he asked grimly. "The opposite," Hayden confirmed. "Blackwell's men." The captain assessed the situation quickly. "They'll try to head us off at Freeman's Bend," he predicted. "Narrow channel there, shallow enough for horses to ford if they're desperate." He turned to his pilot. "Full steam, Johnson. We'll outrun them to the bend." The River Queen surged forward as more fuel was fed to her boilers. The riders on shore, realizing they'd been spotted, abandoned any pretense of stealth and galloped openly along the riverbank, occasionally visible through gaps in the trees. "How many?" Sophia asked, counting the shadowy figures. "At least 5, Hayden estimated. "Probably the reinforcements Tucker warned us about." Captain Donovan joined them at the rail, a shotgun now prominently displayed in his hands. "Freeman's Bend is about 2 miles ahead. If we can clear it before they get there, we're likely safe until Fort Benton. The river widens and deepens after the bend, too much for horses to cross." The race was tense, the steamboat straining against the current while the riders pushed their horses to dangerous speeds over rough terrain. As they approached the bend, Hayden could see that the horsemen were gaining ground, likely to reach the narrow channel before the boat. "They'll make it first," he told Donovan grimly. The captain nodded, already shouting orders to his crew. "Arm yourselves, passengers below deck." "I'm staying," Hayden stated firmly, drawing his revolver. "As am I," Sophia added, producing a small derringer from her medical bag that brought surprised looks from both men. "What? A woman traveling alone needs protection." Donovan barked a short laugh. "As you wish, Doctor. But stay behind cover." As the River Queen rounded the bend, they found their path partially blocked. 3 riders had already reached the narrow channel and stood in the shallow water, rifles raised. 2 more were just arriving, dismounting quickly to join their companions. "Stop the boat." One of the men shouted. "We want only O'Malley and the Ledger." "This is a U.S. mail carrier," Donovan bellowed back. "Interfering with this vessel is a federal offense." The response was a rifle shot that splintered wood near the captain's head. Immediately, Donovan's men returned fire from protected positions, forcing Blackwell's men to seek cover among the rocks along the shore. The River Queen continued forward, its paddle wheel churning the shallow water as it approached the gauntlet of gunmen. Hayden positioned himself behind a stack of cargo, providing covering fire that kept the attackers pinned down as the boat navigated the narrow passage. Sophia stayed low but ready. Her small derringer clutched firmly as she moved among the crewmen, checking for injuries. One man had taken a bullet to the shoulder, which she efficiently bandaged even as gunfire continued to exchange around them. They were nearly through the bend when disaster struck. A well-aimed shot hit something critical in the boat's steering mechanism, sending the vessel lurching toward the shallow bank where 3 of Blackwell's men waited. "We're losing steering," Johnson yelled from the pilot house. The River Queen ground against the riverbank, tilting alarmingly as momentum carried its stern around in the current. In the confusion, two of Blackwell's men managed to leap aboard the listing vessel, weapons drawn. Hayden intercepted the first, tackling him despite the screaming protest from his wounded side. They grappled briefly before Hayden managed to land a solid blow that sent the man staggering backward over the rail and into the shallow river. The second intruder had headed straight for the pilot house, clearly intending to take control of the vessel. Before he reached it, however, a small crack sounded, and the man stumbled, clutching his leg where Sophia's derringer had found its mark. Captain Donovan wasted no time securing the wounded intruder while his crew worked frantically to free the boat from the bank. On shore, the remaining gunmen continued firing, forcing everyone to keep low. "Engines undamaged," came a shout from below decks, "but we need to push off this bank." "Cover me," Hayden told Sophia, moving toward the bow where it was wedged against the shore. "What are you doing?" she demanded, alarmed. "Someone needs to set a pole against the bank to push us off," he explained quickly. "I'm the logical choice." Before she could protest further, he was moving, keeping low until he reached the bow. There, partially sheltered from gunfire by the boat's structure, he found a long pole used for exactly this purpose in shallow waters. The effort of leveraging the heavy boat away from the bank was excruciating, reopening his wound yet again. But with the crew's coordinated efforts from aboard, the River Queen gradually slid back into deeper water, its paddle wheel finding purchase once more. As the boat pulled away from the shore, Hayden collapsed behind the bow's protective railing, his side burning with renewed agony. Sophia was at his side instantly, already opening his shirt to assess the damage. "Stubborn, reckless fool," she muttered, though her hands were gentle as they pressed a clean cloth against the bleeding wound. What part of avoid exertion was unclear? The part where it meant getting shot instead, he replied through gritted teeth. The River Queen was now moving steadily away from Freeman's Bend, leaving Blackwell's frustrated men behind. Captain Donovan approached, his expression a mixture of gratitude and concern. "That was either the bravest or most foolhardy thing I've seen in 30 years on this river," he told Hayden. "Either way, we'd be stuck there taking fire if not for you." "He needs to lie down," Sophia interrupted, her professional tone brooking no argument. "Is there somewhere I can treat him properly?" Donovan immediately offered his own cabin, where Sophia helped Hayden settle onto the narrow bunk. As she cleaned and re-stitched the wound, her movements were efficient but her expression troubled. "You could have been killed," she said quietly after completing her work. "We all could have," he pointed out. "It seemed like the best option at the time." "There's a fine line between courage and recklessness, Hayden O'Malley, and you seem determined to dance on it." Despite her scolding words, her hand found his, squeezing gently. "Please try to stay on this side of alive. I've become rather attached to you." The simple admission warmed him more than any declaration could have. "I'll do my best, Doc. I've recently discovered some compelling reasons to remain breathing." The remainder of the journey passed without incident. The River Queen, though damaged, maintained a steady pace toward Fort Benton, arriving as dusk painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The frontier town's buildings lined the riverbank, dominated by the imposing structure of Fort Benton itself, which now served more as a trading post than a military installation. Captain Donovan had sent a crewman ahead in a skiff to alert the local authorities about their situation. As a result, when they docked, they were met by a contingent of deputies and a distinguished-looking man who introduced himself as Judge William Lawrence. "Marshal Jenkins telegraphed me about your situation after receiving Sheriff Mills's message," the judge explained as they disembarked. "I understand you have evidence concerning Victor Blackwell." Hayden produced the ledger from his coat, handling it carefully as he passed it to the judge. "Everything is documented here, Your Honor. Bribes, rustling operations, even arrangements for 2 murders disguised as accidents." Judge Lawrence examined the book with growing interest. "This is extraordinary. With this and your testimony, we can finally bring Blackwell to justice." He looked up, his expression grave. "But first, we need to secure your safety and rescue Sheriff Mills. I've already dispatched riders to intercept Marshal Jenkins and warn him about the ambush." "And Blackwell's men who attacked our boat?" Sophia inquired. "Deputies are riding out now to arrest them," the judge assured her, "though I suspect they won't linger after their failure." He noticed Hayden's pallor and Sophia's supportive arm around his waist. "But you both need rest and medical attention. I've arranged rooms at the hotel with guards posted." The Prairie Rose Hotel was the finest establishment in Fort Benton, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but represented luxury on the frontier. The judge had secured adjoining rooms for them, with a deputy stationed in the hallway for protection. Once alone in his room, Hayden finally allowed himself to acknowledge the full extent of his exhaustion. He sank onto the bed, wincing as the movement pulled at his freshly stitched wound. A soft knock at the connecting door preceded Sophia's entrance, medical bag in hand. "I thought you might need help," she said, closing the door behind her. "Just tired," he assured her, though they both knew it was an understatement. "Let me be the judge of that," she replied, already moving to examine him with professional efficiency. As she worked, the familiar routine of her medical attention had taken on new meaning. Each touch seemed to carry additional weight, charged with the awareness of boundaries crossed and feelings acknowledged. "Your prognosis, Doc?" he asked when she had finished. "With proper rest and care, you'll recover fully," she replied, her professional demeanor softening as she added, "though I suspect you'll carry yet another impressive scar to add to your collection." "A small price for the company it brought me," he said, capturing her hand as she moved to pack away her supplies. She allowed herself to be drawn closer, sitting beside him on the bed. "Judge Lawrence says it may take several days to process all the evidence and secure the necessary warrants. Marshal Jenkins is expected tomorrow, and then," Hayden asked, the question encompassing far more than legal proceedings. Sophia was silent for a long moment, her green eyes thoughtful as they held his. "Then decisions will need to be made. About Sloan," he surmised. "Your practice." "Yes," she acknowledged, "and about you, your future plans." "They've become considerably more complicated recently," he admitted. "I find myself contemplating possibilities I hadn't considered before." "Such as?" she prompted softly. "Such as whether Sloan might need someone with my particular skills," he suggested, watching her reaction carefully. "Someone who could assist the sheriff, perhaps, or track down missing persons or property. Less dramatic than my previous work, but potentially more rewarding." A smile bloomed slowly across her face, transforming her features with a joy he'd rarely glimpsed beneath her composed exterior. "Sloan could indeed benefit from such services," she agreed. "Though I should warn you that the local physician is notoriously demanding of those in her inner circle." "I've heard rumors to that effect," he replied, matching her smile with his own. "Apparently she insists on honesty and refuses to be charmed by superficial smiles." "She does have her standards," Sophia confirmed, leaning closer. "But I hear she makes exceptions for reformed thieves with a talent for finding what's lost." "Including parts of herself," Hayden suggested, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender affection. "Especially those," she whispered before closing the remaining distance between them. Their kiss deepened, carrying the promise of healing more profound than either had dared hope for when their paths first crossed. When they finally parted, Hayden held her gaze steadily, allowing her to see past the charm and easy smile to the truth beneath. "I love you, Sophia Lawson," he said simply. "I think I have since you first saw through my defenses in that clinic. And I love you, Hayden O'Malley," she replied with equal directness. "Even when you're being recklessly heroic and reopening wounds I've carefully stitched." He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his side. "I'll try to be more cooperative in the future." "See that you are," she advised, her tone mockingly stern. "I intend to keep you in excellent health for many years to come." 3 days later, Marshal Jenkins arrived in Fort Benton with Sheriff Mills and 2 deputies, having successfully avoided the ambush thanks to Judge Lawrence's warning. The evidence in Blackwell's ledger, combined with testimonies from Hayden, Mills, and others who had suffered under the cattle baron's corruption, proved overwhelming. Judge Lawrence issued warrants not only for Blackwell's arrest, but also for several officials who had accepted his bribes. A telegram from Wyoming Territory soon confirmed that Blackwell had been taken into custody at his ranch, his empire crumbling as associates scrambled to save themselves by offering additional testimony. "Justice moves slowly," Mills observed as they gathered in Judge Lawrence's chambers to finalize their statements, "but it does eventually arrive." "Thanks to you both," the judge added, nodding to Hayden and Sophia. "Your courage in bringing this evidence forward despite considerable personal risk is commendable." With their legal obligations fulfilled, they were free to determine their next steps. Sheriff Mills was returning to Sloan the following day, offering them places in his wagon for the journey. "Town's been quiet without you, Doc," he told Sophia. "Mrs. Peterson delivered healthy twin girls who could use their checkup, and old man Simmons is complaining that no one else understands his ailments." "And what about me, Sheriff?" Hayden inquired. "Will Sloan welcome a man of my diverse background?" Mills studied him thoughtfully. "Town could use someone with tracking skills and experience finding people and things that don't want to be found. Deputy position might open up if you're interested, or you could operate independently." A knowing look passed between the sheriff and Sophia. "Either way, I suspect the town doctor would vouch for your character." "She has exacting standards," Hayden agreed solemnly, though his eyes danced with humor as they met Sophia's. "Indeed I do," she confirmed. "But in this case, I'm prepared to offer my unconditional endorsement." The journey back to Sloan was considerably more pleasant than their flight to Fort Benton had been. Hayden's wound was healing well under Sophia's attentive care, and the absence of pursuit allowed for a measured pace that spared both horses and passengers. During the 3-day journey, Hayden and Sophia shared their histories more fully, filling in the gaps of understanding between them. He spoke of his childhood in Ohio, his experiences during the war that had left invisible scars deeper than the physical ones, and the years of drifting afterward. She described her struggle to be taken seriously in medical school, her father's unwavering support, and her determination to create a life on her own terms despite society's expectations. By the time Sloan's modest buildings appeared on the horizon, they had mapped not only their pasts but a possible shared future, one neither had anticipated when Hayden first rode into town with an untended wound and a practiced smile. The town welcomed Sophia's return with evident relief, and embraced Hayden with the cautious acceptance frontier communities extended to newcomers who arrived with local endorsement. Within weeks, he had established himself as a valuable resource tracking lost livestock, locating missing property, and occasionally assisting Sheriff Mills with more complex cases. He rented rooms above the Mercantile and set up a small office where people could seek his services. Though modest compared to his previous earnings from high-stakes acquisitions, the work provided a steady income and, more importantly, the satisfaction of serving a community rather than individual clients of questionable integrity. His relationship with Sophia deepened as they navigated their new circumstances. She maintained her independent practice while he established his business, each respecting the other's professional space while finding increasing joy in their personal connection. 3 months after their return to Sloan on a crisp autumn evening, Hayden waited for Sophia outside her clinic as she completed her final appointment of the day. When she emerged, he offered his arm with a formal courtesy that made her laugh. "What's the occasion?" she asked, noting his unusually neat appearance and the flowers he presented. "I thought we might take a ride," he suggested mysteriously. "There's something I'd like to show you." Intrigued, she allowed him to help her mount the horse he'd brought for her. They rode out of town as the setting sun painted the mountains in brilliant gold and crimson, following a trail that led to a bluff overlooking the valley where Sloan nestled among rolling grasslands. There, to Sophia's surprise, she found a blanket spread on the ground, a basket of food, and a bottle of wine waiting for them. "You've been planning this," she observed as he helped her dismount. "For some time," he admitted, his customary charm giving way to a more genuine nervousness she rarely witnessed. As they settled on the blanket, sharing the simple but thoughtfully prepared meal and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Hayden grew unusually quiet. "What is it?" she finally asked, sensing his uncharacteristic tension. In response, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "3 months ago, you told me you'd become attached to me," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Since then, I've tried to prove myself worthy of that attachment." "Hayden," she breathed, understanding dawning as he opened the box to reveal a modest ring with a single emerald that caught the last light of dusk. "I've spent my life hiding behind charm and keeping my distance from anything permanent," he continued, "until a remarkable doctor saw through my smile to the wounds beneath and offered to stitch what I wouldn't show." He took her hand gently in his. "You've healed more than just the physical wound that brought us together, Sophia. You've given me a reason to stop running, to build something lasting." Tears gathered in Sophia's eyes as he continued, his words flowing more freely now. "I know it won't be conventional. You have your practice, your independence that you've fought so hard for. I would never ask you to diminish yourself or your work. But I believe we could build a life together that honors who we both are while creating something new and stronger than either of us alone." He held the ring between them, a question and an offering. "Sophia Lawson, will you marry me?" For a woman usually so precise with words, Sophia found herself momentarily speechless. When she finally spoke, her voice carried all the emotion she typically kept carefully controlled. "When I came west, I believed I was choosing between my profession and love," she said softly. "I never imagined finding both in a wounded cowboy with a hidden heart as large as his smile." She met his gaze directly. "Yes, Hayden O'Malley, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, their lips met in a kiss that sealed promises beyond words. Above them, stars scattered across the Montana sky, witnesses to healing that went beyond flesh and bone to the deeper wounds of two souls who had found in each other what neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. They were married that winter in Sloan's small church, Sheriff Mills standing as Hayden's best man while Mrs. Peterson, mother of the healthy twins Sophia had delivered, served as her attendant. Judge Lawrence made the journey from Fort Benton to perform the ceremony, bringing news that Victor Blackwell had been convicted on multiple counts and would spend the remainder of his life in prison. Over the years that followed, their unique partnership flourished. Sophia continued her medical practice, eventually training a young assistant who had similar ambitions to become a female physician. Hayden's business evolved to include not only finding missing persons and property, but also serving as a guide for survey teams and scientific expeditions, exploring Montana's vast wilderness. They built a house on the edge of town with enough room for Sophia's expanded clinic on one side and Hayden's office on the other. Between them, a comfortable home where they could retreat from their professional obligations to the private world they had created together. Children came first: a daughter with Sophia's auburn hair and Hayden's quick smile, then twin boys who inherited their mother's determination and their father's talent for finding what others overlooked. They grew up understanding that conventional boundaries meant little when set against genuine calling and true partnership. On their 10th anniversary, Hayden presented Sophia with a journal he had kept since their first meeting, detailing not only the adventure that had brought them together, but the quieter, equally significant moments that had shaped their life since. The final entry reads simply, "The wounded cowboy who hid his pain behind a smile found healing in the hands of a woman brave enough to stitch what he wouldn't show." And in the process, they discovered that some wounds serve a purpose, after all, guiding us to the very healing we didn't know we sought.